How are you? Welcome. Today I want to celebrate Africa with you. Now normally when you say someone's going to cook, you don't talk about celebrating a nation, but if you've been with me before, you understand that that's precisely what I'm about. The Frugal Gourmet is committed to trying to understand other peoples and to educate your own children to understand other peoples through cooking. Remember, a cuisine, a style of cooking, is a way of thinking more than it is a way of eating. Do you understand what I mean? We bring together certain food products and eat them not just because they happen to be available, but we do things with them because of the way we think about ourselves. And Africa has some marvelous cuisines that will help us make that very point. So we're going to start today with a stew from Biafra that will be served over a couscous. I'll give you the history of this dish in just a minute, but I want to get it started right now because we must brown one chopped up chuck steak. This is a stew that is made with beef, pork, chicken. You throw in all sorts of things. We're going to use a chuck steak and a chicken today. So let's get started with the chuck steak. And you see what I've done is simply remove the bones here. There we are. And I'm going to chop up the rest of the chuck. Get rid of the big chunk of fat. You certainly don't need that. But cube up the chuck. It's very inexpensive. And this is going to simmer in a marvelous stew for so long that we don't have to worry about it. Up into good cubes here for a Biafran couscous. You know Biafra doesn't even exist anymore? It exists only in the hearts of the Biafran people. Let me get some oil in the pan here. Pan's already hot. Remember the old rule? Put the oil in the pan first. In a hot pan, be sure the pan is hot first. Then you put in the oil. See, it's smoking a little bit. So in goes the meat. And we'll brown that very quickly. And then I want to talk to you about Biafra. There we go. It's really absurd, I suppose, to talk about African cooking. It's as silly as talking about American cooking or Chinese cooking because we don't know what you're talking about. Africa, as a continent, is filled with so many nations that vary so drastically in terms of their approach to reality and to food that it's impossible to talk about African cooking without talking about 50-some nations, I suppose, 50 different styles of cuisine. So we're going to just mention some tribes or nations or communities or styles and try and get by with each one because they all have a different cuisine. The people of Biafra, for instance, are really down to nothing. They were wiped out in some massive wars, you remember. And this dish, this Biafran stew that I'm making for you today, the recipe was given me by a fellow by the name of George Obiozer. And George had 217 cousins in Biafra, and he corresponded with 70 of them. He was a good friend of mine when I was a chaplain in my old days at the university. And George brought with his interest in food a whole approach to life that I'm celebrating today. So here's to George Obiozer and to all of his people that were wiped out in those terrible, terrible wars. The people of Biafra. They were neat people. So, the meat's just about brown. Let's get a pot ready. We want to cut up one chicken. And we'll throw one chicken in the pot, huh? Where are we going to put the pot? There we go. Remember that in this case, we can just cut this chicken up in a hurry. We don't have to do a lot of work on him. So we'll just whack him up here. There we go, one whole chicken. I always cut up my own chickens. It's much cheaper than buying them pre-cut. Besides, they do it with a bandsaw. You don't need that. All right, so you take the thigh now, and we'll separate the thigh from the leg. There we go. That just goes in the pot. You notice we're not browning the chicken. You've caught that already, haven't you? You could tell because I'm not going to brown it. That's all there is to it. We're not going to bother with that. I'm having trouble finding that joint. There it is. There he is. Okay. Alrighty. And the rest of the chicken we can whack up in a hurry. Thusly, just lay him on his side. Here's the breastbone, you see. Lay him on his side. And you can cut away the breast here. Now, if you don't have a cleaver, why, I'll give you about 10 minutes to go out and buy one. Wait till I'm done today, and then you go out and get one. It's just marvelous fun. We don't have to worry. I'm going to cut off the tail, the little nip there. We don't need that. We're going to leave the bones in this bird. Just whack him up into serving pieces or eating pieces, you see, and throw them in the pot. That's all there is to it. You know why? You know why I'm doing this? Why is he cutting it up so small? Well, because this is all to be eaten with our fingers. In Africa, in most of those nations, you eat from a common pot. And therefore, everything is to be chopped up and ready for you. Just like in China, you see. You don't eat from a common pot in China, but you do in a way, don't you? Everything is shared. The point is you use chopsticks, and everything is to be cut up ahead of time. And certainly that's the case in the nation called Biafra, which is not anymore. Is it possible to have a nation that is not, and you still think about it? Sure, it's possible. There are many people here living in America who cannot go back to their homeland because the place is no longer called what they know it really is. You see, the name has been changed and the different government and the whole business, but in their hearts they still know about their place. You know, that's typical of a lot of the Soviet nations now. The place supposedly, legally doesn't exist. And here in Chicago, it does exist. You can go down the street and find some of those nations in whole neighborhoods. It's a memory. It's a memory. And that's what food's about. We cook certain things to remember. And that's why I'm making a Biafran stew today, because I want to remember the people of Biafra. Okay, into the pot now. I've placed the ground beef, 1 chicken. This is so simple, a recipe, that you can't believe it. You got it so far? 1 chicken, 1 big chuck steak. I want to throw in 1 yellow onion, just whacked up. This is going to cook for a long time, so don't worry about it. 1 yellow onion. Come here, onion. Here we go. Remember now, when I do an onion, I just take the whole peel off, you see. That way you don't have to stand here and weep and cry and lament and moan. You shouldn't do any of those things when you cook. You shouldn't have to bother. Save the peels for your soup stock. Someone asked me the other day how big my bucket is down here for soup stock. Well, that's none of your business. It's pretty good size. I make a lot of soup stock. And we'll whack up the onion for our Biafran stew for couscous. And it goes to the pot. And now we need 1 green pepper. Move him. And you're going to cut him in half. This way, lay them down, and we can peel the pepper, core it right away by simply grabbing the top and pulling out the core. There's nothing to it. It comes right out. You see? And we'll put our green pepper into the pot, chop it up very coarsely. Remember, these things are to be eaten with your fingers now, so you don't want to have this stuff all chopped up fine, and you'll dribble all over the rug. That's no good. That'll do us. That'll do us. Into the pot it goes. All right. Now, in addition, we want to add 1 can. What size is this? Is this a 303? 28-ounce can of tomatoes, canned tomatoes. You don't see me use canned tomatoes much, do you? I'm going to kind of squish them up a bit here. Boy, be careful, because this will just go all over the kitchen. You hear it? Listen to these things. Crazy, aren't they? That's fine. Maybe you should let one of your kids do this, because you'll have a field day. And for our seasoning, for our Biafran couscous, we want to add a stiff shot of Tabasco. Now, in Africa, the sauce would look a little bit different, and it's a little strange, but it's very close to the sort of flavor. Good Lord, look at him go. Well, this dish is to have some oomph to it. You know, in Africa, the weather means, in most of those nations, means that you use hot spices in order to preserve things, to save them, so that when you find a piece of meat that will be usable for your family, you have to cook it in such a way that it's going to last a couple of days. And the refrigeration was unknown in some of those earlier cultures, you see, traditional cultures. So, and they still cook the old ways. You still eat those things, even though you have a big refrigerator. You still spice it the same way because it helps you remember who you are. That's what a cuisine is for. Who am I? Let me tell you. And you start cooking, you see. All right, let's see. I think we have everything here but the salt and pepper. We do. All we need now is some salt and pepper, and we're set. Now we're going to simmer the ground chuck steak, chopped up whole chicken, 1 yellow onion, and 1 green pepper, 1 can, everything's 1, you see, 1 can of our tomatoes. We're going to simmer that for, probably an hour and a half until everything's tender. Now, you don't need too much salt in this now. Be careful. Till everything is tender, and then this will be eaten by, well, let me show you how it looks. Let me put a lid on this. We'll put this on a burner, you see. And you want to see what happens when you find a room here? When this is cooked, Get ready. Here's Biafra. There we are. This is an absolutely marvelous dish. You see the beef is tender. The chicken just falls right off the bone. You see that? Isn't that gorgeous? You know, the first time I ever served this dish, I served it to a group of students when I was a chaplain at the university, and they gathered in my home every day for a course on food and theology. That's how I got into this thing. Some of you have asked, so I might as well tell you the truth. A bunch of students took me from my office at the university, and we began to discuss the meaning of the politics of starvation, the meaning of food and theology, the history of the table, and out of that came a course that I taught every year at the university for a long time. And the first time that we had a discussion of Biafra, or of any nation in Africa, I served this dish. And the kids absolutely loved it. It was a marvelous thing. And every time I cook it now, I think of all of that bunch. That was 15, 20 years ago. And you know, I miss them very much. The second thing you want to make for this dish, let me get it off the stove and show you. And you don't need the recipe for this, so I'll give it to you. It's very simple. I'm using farina instead of a normal what do you call it? A normal couscous, which is simply a grain. This is a wheat ground up. You see, this called, in the market, it's called cream of wheat or regular farina. And to this, I've added some bulgur wheat. And you see, bulgur wheat is that little grain that is wheat that is cracked and then soaked and then dried out in the sun, so it's kind of partially cooked. And I mixed some of that in with my farina and then cooked it long enough so it's nice and thick. Recipes are right on the package, and you just add bulgur wheat to yours. But then add a little extra farina so that it's good and thick and pasty, because we're going to eat this along with our Biafran stew as a couscous, which means, you see that we're going to use our fingers, and it's got to be gooey and thick. Isn't this gorgeous? Now, the stew goes along the side here. Let me show you how this looks. Get another. This is too hot for me to eat right now for you, because it's just finished cooking. But the meat goes alongside the dish. There we are. And all of this is eaten with your fingers. I made a mess here on the edge of the plate. You do it too. I'm not going to be too concerned. All right, let's set this one down for you. And it's a beautiful Biafran couscous, a very lovely dish. There. Now, thirdly, we have a couscous. The couscous was the grain, you see. That's this is the couscous. The grain dish, the farina, is called the couscous. And then the stew goes with the couscous. And you eat them together with your fingers. And you dip it. I'll show you later when I won't burn myself to death. Let me give you another dish. So we have 1, 2 already today on our tirade on Africa. Let me give you a dish now from Kenya. And in Kenya, they're very fond of coconut milk. You remember now, this nation is so... shouldn't call it a nation, should I? Someone's going to call up and be angry with me. Africa is such a gigantic country that there are many, many nations. And in Kenya, they're fond of coconut milk. So you find coconut milk in a lot of recipes. I have one for you for sweet potatoes cooked in coconut milk. Look at this. It's absolutely terribly unusual. I'll show you how it's done right now. First of all, we need, what is that? 3 or 4 sweet potatoes, you see? Not very many, but enough to get us going.